Chapter 3 The Ghosts in the Library. After Gaston and his father had been invited to dinner with the staff that first wonderful night 5 years ago, to Gaston's delight, dinner in the servants' hall soon became part of their routine. Life was perfect, as far as Gaston was concerned. He spent most of his time with his best friend the prince, and he had his evenings with his father and the other servants, who he looked at as his family. Even though he and the prince were a bit older, they still filled their time with wild adventures and exploring. They sometimes found themselves feeling rather cooped up in the castle, especially on occasions when they were stuck indoors for any length of time. And this particular time it had been raining almost constantly for the greater part of a fortnight. Having already explored every inch of the castle and its foundations, they came up with a way to entertain themselves, and it was an impish plan. Because they knew the librarian, Monsieur Bibliot, hated to have any of the books leave the library. Gaston and the prince thought it would be great fun not only to sneak out books they wanted to read, but to rearrange Monsieur Bibliot's meticulously organized system to distract him from noticing some of his treasured books were missing. And poor Monsieur Bibliot's increasing frustration only inspired the boys to get up to do more mischief. Of course, Monsieur Bibliot suspected Gaston, but he was a smart man, and he wouldn't come right out and accuse Gaston in front of everyone, at least not at first. He would make little remarks and steer the conversation in ways he hoped would slip Gaston up, revealing it was he who had been sneaking into the library and rearranging his precious books. This had become an almost nightly event, Monsieur Bibliot bringing up mislaid books at dinner time, or really any time anyone would listen. The mystery of the books had become an all-consuming obsession, and the rest of the staff didn't have time or patience for his long-winded pontifications. "I do believe I saw some of your books in the West Wing attic, Monsieur Bibliot," said Plumet one night when Monsieur Bibliot was on one of his rants. "It was when I was up there dusting. I wondered why they were there, but I suppose you had your reasons." It was obvious to everyone at the table, except for Monsieur Bibliot, that Plumet was teasing the librarian. "That would be no reason whatsoever, mademoiselle. Every self-respecting bibliophile knows a damp and dusty attic is the worst possible place for any book, let alone the treasured tomes that are housed within the royal library." Monsieur Bibliot's face was screwed up in anger, making his eyes even smaller than usual, and his fists were clenched tightly. "If it wasn't you, I wonder how they ended up in the attic, monsieur?" she asked with a wink to the others at the table. This had become the staff's nightly entertainment. "I have a culprit in mind," Monsieur Bibliot said, eyeing Gaston, but Grosvenor had not joined them that evening, and he dared not say anything in front of the boy's father. Almost everyone in the household staff seemed happy Grosvenor and Gaston had been taking their meals with them more frequently ever since that happy evening 5 years prior. And Gaston was pleased his father didn't find spending time with his old friends to be as painful as he had imagined. Gaston understood that being in the castle might remind his father of the days when his mother was alive, and it might cause him pain, but now it seemed Grosvenor felt comfortable spending his evenings among friends, among others who loved and valued Rose almost as much as he did. Mrs. Potts was especially delighted Grosvenor and Gaston frequently joined them. She loved hearing Gaston's stories about his and the prince's adventures, which were becoming bolder now that they were young teens. Even Mr. Cogsworth had gotten used to seeing them at dinner time on most evenings. The only person who still grumbled about it and gave Gaston side glances was Monsieur Bibliot, who had become singularly focused on solving the mystery of his wandering books. The boys, of course, found all this rather amusing, watching Monsieur Bibliot hunt around the castle looking for his books, sent on wild goose chases by the other servants. Gaston and the prince began to leave clues that would lead the poor man to search in strange places like the castle graveyard, only to find nothing there. It was a stroke of luck for the boys that Monsieur Bibliot had brought about his own misery by annoying everyone so much they were unwittingly part of what was turning into an elaborate prank. Gaston didn't understand why Monsieur Bibliot was so ill at ease about books leaving the library, why it was he and the prince had to sneak them out in the cover of darkness. If Monsieur Bibliot were a bit less regimented in his approach, then perhaps things wouldn't have gone so terribly wrong for the poor man. I think I agree with your theory, Monsieur Bibliot. There can be only one culprit. I am sure it is obvious to all of us sitting at this table, said Lumiere, playfully smiling at Gaston. I knew it! At last, someone with some sense. Thank you, Lumiere. It's time we all stop pretending we don't know who is to blame and punish this thief. But how do we punish a ghost, monsieur? Asked Lumiere, nudging Plumet so she would stop giggling. Excuse me, sir? Did I hear you correctly? Did you say ghosts? Monsieur Bibliot was aghast, but the others at the table nodded along as if they were convinced the castle was haunted. Gaston felt a swell of warmth, knowing they did it to protect him. But it was Lumiere's complicity in their little ruse that made him most happy. Gaston could always count on his creative flair in situations like this. Indeed, you did, Monsieur Bibliot. It is the only explanation, said Lumiere. Do you really think so? Has anyone noticed anything else in the castle gone missing or put in strange locations? I think this particular spirit has a fondness for books, monsieur. And who can blame him? Perhaps it's the ghost of the previous librarian, Gaston said with a straight face. I doubt it's a previous bibliophile, young man. The attic is the last place they would hide books, trickster or not. Well, if it is a ghost, I know just how to deal with pesky specters. I was just reading a fascinating book. Good! It seems you have it all in hand, Monsieur Bibliot. I'm sure you will find your books in no time. Now, it's getting late. I think it's time we all say good night, said Mrs. Potts, who seemed to feel bad for the man. But then again, Mrs. Potts was a very kind and patient woman. Yet Monsieur Bibliot managed to test even Mrs. Potts' kindness and patience as the days wore on, and would still not drop the matter of the missing books. It wasn't until he marched into her sitting room a few days later that she lost her temper. Mrs. Potts had been busy at her desk with a stack of papers in front of her, writing up her list for an upcoming house party when Monsieur Bibliot came blustering in without bothering to knock. Books! Books! More missing books! I'm at my wits' end, Mrs. Potts. Monsieur Bibliot was standing in the doorway, waving his hands and yelling so loudly the other servants passing him in the hallway looked to see what was the matter. When they saw who it was, they just rolled their eyes and kept walking. Mrs. Potts this time had gotten used to Monsieur Bibliot blustering in, disturbing her peace and complaining about missing books. On this occasion, however, she had been less patient than usual because she was frantically trying to finish writing up the menus for the house party so Mr. Cogsworth could plan the wine list. They all had more work than usual planning this party, and Mrs. Potts didn't have time for this nonsense. I demand someone do something about this at once, Monsieur Bibliot continued. Books out of place, books missing altogether. This is complete chaos. And don't insult my intelligence by suggesting we have a ghost. It seemed after a few days of ghost hunting, Monsieur Bibliot had given up the idea of a supernatural trickster and was back to suspecting Gaston. If Mrs. Potts had bothered to look up, she would have seen Monsieur Bibliot clenching his fists and shaking them with anger. It was no matter. She didn't have to look up to know his expression. This scene had played out several times before over the past few months, and each time Monsieur Bibliot had become more agitated and more demanding and more determined to prove Gaston's guilt. I know Gaston is the book napper, he said, almost causing Mrs. Potts to look up from her work. Book napper? Now really, this is getting silly, don't you think? Are you sure you've not mislaid them, Monsieur Bibliot? Perhaps take a good look around the library, and you'll find they were there all along, she said, still focused on her work, desperately trying to finish writing the menus before Mr. Cogsworth came in, wondering why they were late. Are you suggesting I don't know how to do my job, Mrs. Potts? I must insist Grosvenor's cottage be searched. I know Gaston had taken the books, and I know you have all been covering for him. Monsieur Bibliot was testing Mrs. Potts beyond her limits. She looked up from her papers and glared at Monsieur Bibliot, clearly agitated. Now Mrs. Potts was by all accounts a very kind woman, the kindest woman any would ever be lucky to know. But the one thing no one did was threaten her family, that she would not stand for, and that's how she saw Grosvenor and Gaston as part of her family. And she wasn't about to sit there and entertain the thought of Grosvenor's cottage being searched for any reason whatsoever. I am sure you're aware we have a big house party coming up, and you must have guessed we would all be busy making the arrangements, which is exactly what I should be doing this moment rather than discussing your missing books. 20 lords and ladies will be here in a matter of days, Monsieur Bibliot. We do not have time for this. Mrs. Potts was stone-faced and much more serious than usual, but the angry librarian didn't back down. I know that's why I didn't bother Mr. Cogsworth with this. I see. Well, I assure you, we all have our work cut out for us. Are you looking for something to do, Monsieur Bibliot, since you seem to have so much time on your hands fretting about missing books? Perhaps you'd like to write up the seating charts, plan the menus, place the orders, assign rooms to all our guests, and arrange the entertainment. I assume you saw the legions of maids scrubbing and dusting and arranging the flowers. Or perhaps you noticed the footmen rolling up the carpets to make room for dancing, while the others are polishing the silver. Not to mention the new pavilion that's being built. Or how about the tent that's being erected for the outdoor activities? Every single member of the staff, outdoor and in, is preparing for the King and Queen's house party, all except for you. But since this is an emergency on the grandest of scales, I will ask everyone to stop what they're doing and look for your missing books at once. If you won't help me, then I will be forced to take this up with Mr. Cogsworth. Why don't we go speak with him together, she said, standing up. He's in his pantry, grumbling and pacing. I'm sure it won't bother him at all to learn the menus are late because you're vexing about some missing books. I won't bother him just now. But perhaps you could tell me where I might find Grosvenor. I think I will take this up with him directly. Feel free. He's in the courtyard. Mrs. Potts smiled mischievously as she watched him storm down the hall on his way to have words with Grosvenor. And just as he was about to round the corner, she called out to him, stopping him in his tracks. Oh, and Monsieur Bibliot, could you please tell His Majesty the King that Mr. Cogsworth will be late coming down to go over the wine list because we were unavoidably late by a book emergency? What? Me, the librarian, taking a message to the king? That's unheard of. I don't even know where he is. He's in the courtyard with Grosvenor, planning the hunt, of course. I'm sure once the king hears of your troubles, he will insist we all drop what we're doing to discover the mystery of your missing books. Mrs. Potts hoped this would finally put an end to his antics, at least until the house party was over. You haven't heard the last of this, Mrs. Potts, I assure you. I'm sure I haven't, she said, sighing and shaking her head. What was that all about? Asked Mr. Cogsworth, suddenly popping his head out of his pantry after Monsieur Bibliot stalked away in a huff. Oh, nothing, Mr. Cogsworth. It seems the ghost in the library is up to his shenanigans again, she said, laughing. Do you have those menus written up? He asked, hardly paying attention. Mrs. Potts could see Mr. Cogsworth was feeling the strain of his impending events, though only Mrs. Potts would have noticed. She had known Mr. Cogsworth for a long time and could recognize the little signs that gave him away. She saw the pressure of this house party bubbling under the surface of his smooth, stoic facade. It had been many years since the family entertained at this level. The king and queen were so often away in recent years they didn't have the opportunity, so it had been a surprise when the queen said they would be hosting a house full of guests for an extended period of time, which would include lavish dinner parties, nightly entertainments, hunting parties for the men, picnic and scenic outings for the women, and for the big finish, an exquisite ball on the grandest scale since the king and queen's wedding. It was no surprise the staff was run off their feet. Preparing for this event was a Herculean task, and it was no wonder the staff was annoyed with Monsieur Bibliot for distracting them when they had so much to do, and thus blew off a bit of steam by teasing him. "I do have the menus," she said, handing them to Mr. Cogsworth. "I was making my final adjustments just as Mr. Bibliot interrupted my work." "What do you mean, ghosts in the library? Monsieur Bibliot doesn't actually believe the castle is haunted, does he?" asked Mr. Cogsworth, as if her words had just registered. "No, he blames Gaston and demanded Grosvenor's cottage be searched." "That's ridiculous." Mrs. Potts was surprised to hear him defending Gaston. What would Gaston want with books anyway? Unless they had pictures, the ghost theory makes more sense. "Think of it, Gaston reading," he laughed, and Mrs. Potts frowned. "That's quite enough of that, Mr. Cogsworth. If you know what's good for you and would like to remain in my good graces, I suggest you keep those comments to yourself. And if you haven't noticed, Gaston isn't a boy any longer. Neither of them are. They're both 13 now, almost men." Mr. Cogsworth were frequently stuffy and a notorious snob, and it wasn't a secret he didn't approve of Gaston having the run of the house. But he wasn't often a cruel man, and in this instance, Mrs. Potts thought he was being cruel, and she couldn't have been more disappointed in him, and by the look on his face, it seemed he was disappointed in himself. "That was a low blow, Mr. Cogsworth, even for you," she said, making it clear he had gone too far. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Potts. That was over the line. This house party has me rattled. I won't even try to deny it. It's been so long since we've had a guest list of this magnitude. Please tell me you have everything under control." "Of course I do, Mr. Cogsworth. Not to worry. We're all under pressure. But I am sure it will be a tremendous success," said Mrs. Potts. At that moment, she spied Gaston around the corner into the kitchen and stopped short when he saw Mr. Cogsworth standing there. He ducked behind the wall and waited. "I don't like it when we are at odds, Mrs. Potts," Mr. Cogsworth said, looking a bit sheepish, and she knew he was telling the truth. Further, there was no time for one of their discussions, not with so much more to do for the party, and certainly not with Gaston in earshot. "Off with you. You still have the wine to plan," she said, ushering him back to his pantry with a wink for Gaston, who was peeking around the corner, waiting for the conversation to end. But Mr. Cogsworth would not budge. "Oh, and Mrs. Potts, I will treat Gaston like a young man the moment he starts acting like one." "Does that apply to the prince as well?" she asked, with a cheeky smile. Mr. Cogsworth didn't answer. He just shook his head and went into his pantry. She didn't mind. She knew he was eager to get the wine list written up for the king, and Gaston was waiting to pay her a visit. Though today she didn't have a moment to spare, it would be a wonder if she took a break at all that day before it was time to sit down for dinner. Mr. Cogsworth looked like he was in a state. "What happened?" asked Gaston, laughing in her doorway. "Get in here, young man," she said, quickly pulling him into her sitting room and shutting the door. "Haven't you heard? It seems the library ghost is up to his trickery once again," she added, giving him a knowing but indulgent look. "Luckily for you, Mr. Cogsworth is too busy to take this book debacle seriously. But might I suggest you and the prince replace Monsieur Bibliot's treasures before he takes this further? He's threatening to have your cottage searched, and you know what that would mean. They would discover your secret treehouse, and no doubt find the books you're hiding within it." Mrs. Potts walked over to her tea table and poured them both a cup. "Hey, how did you know about our treehouse? What makes you think we have the books?" asked Gaston, taking a small round cookie covered in powdered sugar from the plate on Mrs. Potts's tea table. "There is very little that goes on around here I don't know about." "I see," said Gaston, munching one of Mrs. Potts's delicious cookies with a guilty expression. "Don't worry, my boy. Your secrets are safe with me. Only your father and I know about the treehouse. But it's no secret you and the prince have the books. But for the life of us, we don't understand why it's such a problem. That's why we all tease the poor man. But I worry this might have gone a bit too far, and I don't have time to deal with it with everything else going on." "He's angry because we broke his rule. That's the problem," said Gaston, taking another cookie. "But why have such a rule? Aren't books for reading?" Mrs. Potts threw up her hands in exasperation. "Exactly how Gaston and I feel," said the prince, ducking into the room with an impish look on his face. "So what did I miss this time?" Mrs. Potts wasn't sure she liked what she saw in the boy on occasion, but she didn't have time for one of her lectures. "Monsieur Bibliot is making a fuss again. Maybe you and Gaston can help him discover the mystery behind the missing books, while I get back to planning your parents' house party," she said, motioning to the plate of cookies so he would take some. "Perhaps we'll do just that, Mrs. Potts," said the prince with a sneaky grin. "I think I know just the thing." Later that night, long after Monsieur Bibliot had gone to sleep, exhausted from many hours of searching the castle for the missing books, he was roused by a strange noise in the men's corridor outside of his room. He could hear the floorboards creaking and could swear there was someone was lurking right outside his door. He peered into the darkness at the sliver of light shining from under the doorway of his pitch-dark room and saw a shadow move across it, which made him start with a bolt. Someone was there. "Who's there?" he asked in a weak voice as he pulled the coverlet up under his chin like a frightened child. But whoever it was didn't answer. They just stood there in terrifying silence. "State your business or leave," he called out rather more loudly, trying to sound brave as he mustered his courage to light the candle on his bedside table. The room exploded with light when he struck the match and ignited the candle's wick. He quickly slipped on his dressing jacket, adjusted his sleeping cap, and picked up the plate that held the candlestick with shaking hands. He made his way to the door slowly, very much afraid of what he might find on the other side. But when he opened the door, he saw something completely unexpected. "Books! That damnable boy," he said, looking at the stack of books on the floor. When he leaned over to collect them, he heard someone scurrying around the corner and down the hall. "Gaston! I know it's you!" Monsieur Bibliot rushed down the hall, hoping to catch Gaston in the act. But what he found was a trail of books scattered along the corridors. As Monsieur Bibliot followed the trail, he felt a chill in the air that made him shiver, and he wondered if Gaston had taken the books after all. Perhaps there really was a ghost. He had read in one of his books on the nature of supernatural entities that almost every account of a spectral encounter was accompanied by a distinct chill in the air. And there was indeed a distinct chill that penetrated his very being. There was no denying it, but could there really be a ghost? It didn't seem possible. "Don't be a fool," he said aloud to himself. "There are no ghosts in this castle." But he wasn't sure. He looked around for an open window. For some logical reason, it was suddenly so cold, but he could not account for it. He knew old castles were, by nature, cold places, and he knew not only because he lived in one, but because he had read so many books about others. Yet he also knew castles were notorious for being haunted places, and he wasn't sure if he was shivering from fear or because the gallery was particularly cold that evening. The conundrum made him quite dizzy, and he followed the trail of books. He wasn't sure if he was feeling faint due to seeing his precious tomes littering the gallery in such a disgraceful manner, or if he was truly fearful the castle was haunted. Whatever the reason, he regretted not waking up at least one of the footmen to accompany him on his frightful mission. He finally found himself standing in front of the library doors, where he could hear strange noises coming from within, wailing and thumping sounds that sent terror into his heart as he stood there in his pajamas and sleeping cap, holding his candle and looking like an illustration from one of his books. He couldn't believe this was happening. If he didn't know better, he would think he was suffering from some sort of walking dream sickness. How could his library really be haunted? The idea was preposterous. When he opened the library doors, he was astonished to see ghosts, actual ghosts, dancing on the grand upper gallery. They were pulling books off the shelves and throwing them every which way. The ghosts were just as Monsieur Biblio had imagined they would look, white, billowy, and frightful, with large, round, expressionless black hole eyes, and they paid absolutely no attention to him whatsoever. They were taking delight in their mayhem, laughing and hurling Monsieur Biblio's treasured tomes with wild abandonment. All trembling and fear left Monsieur Biblio in that moment, seeing his books treated in such an ill fashion, and it was replaced with indignation, giving him the courage to confront the mischievous spirits. "Stop this at once, I say! Show some respect!" And to his surprise, the ghosts stopped, looking as if they were frozen in time, standing there, holding great stacks of books while peering down at him from the gallery. "Spirits, please, I command you to put those books down carefully and leave this place at once, never to return," he said, managing to muster an authoritative tone. He had read that spirits were more likely to do your bidding if you spoke to them in such a manner, and so far it seemed to be working. He was feeling rather proud of himself. After all, he was a librarian, and not a spiritualist or master of the magical arts. But one of the things Monsieur Biblio loved most about his work, what he loved most about books, was that there was almost nothing he couldn't do as long as he took the time to research it first. "Now off with you, trickster spirits! Go back to the dark places where you belong," he said, feeling more like a powerful wizard than a librarian. But then something happened he did not expect. The ghosts started laughing, actually laughing at him. He couldn't believe it. And they were throwing books right at him from the gallery above. Monsieur Biblio screamed as he tried to dodge the books as they came raining down all around him, slamming onto the floor with a clatter that sounded like thunder. He shielded his head as the ghosts laughed and threw book after book at him, sending him running from the library. Monsieur Biblio was so afraid he didn't stop running until he reached Mr. Cogsworth's room in the men's corridor, where he found himself pounding the door furiously and with great fervor. "Mr. Cogsworth! Mr. Cogsworth! Please wake up!" Monsieur Biblio was trembling in fear, but was brought out of his stupor when Mr. Cogsworth opened his bedroom door abruptly, with his mustache askew, his hair mussed, and his face full of wrath. "What is the meaning of this, Biblio? What's the matter now?" asked Mr. Cogsworth. Monsieur Biblio had never seen him so angry, never seen him looking anything other than perfectly composed. "It's true, Mr. Cogsworth. There are ghosts in the library. Come quickly," said Monsieur Biblio, adjusting his sleeping cap, which had slid down while he was running, and now almost covered his eyes. "Poppycock, you're having nightmares again, man. Go back to bed." Mr. Cogsworth was about to slam the door in Monsieur Biblio's face, but Monsieur Biblio put his foot out to stop him. "No, Mr. Cogsworth, I swear. They're in there now. I must insist you come with me." The poor man was out of breath from running and from his frightening ordeal. Surely Mr. Cogsworth could see he was telling the truth. Surely he wouldn't dismiss this as trivial nonsense. There were ghosts in the library, and something had to be done. "Very well, Wake the footmen and tell them to meet us in the library. If we do indeed have ghosts, then we should face them prepared." Mr. Cogsworth took his dressing jacket off the hook on the wall next to his door and pulled it on. He tied the belt with an angry flourish and ushered Monsieur Biblio out of his way. Monsieur Biblio woke the footman, as Mr. Cogsworth had asked, and led the groggy and confused young men to the library, where Mr. Cogsworth was waiting for them. But before they walked into the room, Monsieur Biblio stopped them so he might prepare the footmen for the frightening spectacle they were about to witness. "Now, gentlemen, you must harden your resolve. We must stand our ground no matter what may happen. Apparitions such as these feed on our fear, so whatever you do, don't appear affrighted," said the librarian as they walked into the library. But once they were inside, his jaw dropped open. There were no ghosts, or even any books on the floor. Everything was neat and tidy and put away in its proper place. There was no sign anything had happened at all. It was confounding. He didn't understand. "Yeah, it's a right old mess in here. It's full of ghosts," said Francis, one of the footmen, making the others laugh. "I'm telling you, there were ghosts in here. I saw them with my own eyes." Monsieur Biblio spun in circles, looking around the room in confusion. "They were here, I swear." "You, Mr. Biblio, have awoken the house for nothing more than a trifling nightmare, and with all the work we have ahead of us before the house party," said Mr. Cogsworth, who seemed to have straightened his mustache and smoothed down his hair on their way downstairs. "It wasn't a nightmare. I tell you, there were ghosts in here, and they were hurling books at me." The librarian looked around wildly for any sign this hadn't all been a dream. Clearly the spirits had cleaned up after themselves, but was that likely? He hadn't read that spirits were particularly fastidious in that way, but nevertheless it had happened. He didn't care what the library looked like now. Just moments before it had been chaos. "What's more likely, Monsieur Biblio, a haunted library or an overwrought librarian suffering from nightmares? Now, if you don't mind, I think we will go back to bed. I suggest you do the same." Mr. Cogsworth motioned to the footman to leave the room. "But what of the ghosts? Something must be done. Wait, what's that? Did you hear that laughter?" asked Monsieur Biblio. His eyes were wild as he darted to a bookcase behind which he could swear he heard laughing. "First ghosts and now someone laughing among the books? Monsieur Biblio, I do believe you need a rest. I wonder if we should have Monsieur d'Arc take a look at you." "Now look here. It's true, I say. I'll show you." Monsieur Biblio pressed a discreet button on the bookshelf, which slid open to reveal a stack of books tucked away in a secret compartment. The very books that had been thrown at him moments earlier. Suddenly it all became clear. He knew what had happened, and his blood began to boil. "Come out, Gaston! I know you're in there, you horrible, fiendish, wretched little—" Oh. Monsieur Biblio was shocked to see the prince come out from his hiding place behind the stack of books. I'm sorry, my prince. I didn't realize it was you." "Clearly," said the prince. "What's this all about, Monsieur Biblio? Mr. Cogsworth? Why are you all here in your night clothes?" The prince drew himself up and crossed his arms imperiously, as if it were perfectly normal to be hiding behind a bookcase in the middle of the night. "I'm sorry, Your Highness. Monsieur Biblio must have had a nightmare. I do apologize," Mr. Cogsworth said, his face growing red. "Of course I don't blame you, Cogsworth," said the prince, glaring at Monsieur Biblio. "What are you all playing at? I know Gaston is in there with you. I know he's behind all this." Monsieur Biblio sputtered in rage. He had had enough of Gaston and the prince's tomfoolery, and he could only take his anger out on one of the boys. They had both been plaguing him for years, taking his books and not returning them. It wasn't as if he could lash out at the prince, call him out on his complicity, but he could make sure Gaston was punished for his wicked book-thieving ways. If there was one thing Monsieur Biblio could not abide, it was disrespecting books, and Gaston and the prince had shown disrespect of the lowest order. They had scattered them throughout the castle and thrown them onto the floor, and there was no way this would go unpunished if he could help it. Let's say Gaston is behind all this. So what if he is? What will you do about it? Asked the prince, more domineering than ever. It wasn't Monsieur Bibliau's place to say, or even to have an opinion on such things. But as far as he was concerned, the prince wasn't all he was cracked up to be, and he was getting more impertinent by the day. And Gaston was even worse. He didn't understand why almost the entire household worshipped them. It seemed it was only Mr. Cogsworth and he himself who saw Gaston for who he was. It made sense why old Mr. Cogsworth would make excuses for the prince and indulge him. But Monsieur Bibliau was quite sure that in no time the prince was going to turn into a little monster if someone didn't take him in hand. Come now, Monsieur Bibliau, you don't want to say anything you might regret. You forget yourself, said Mr. Cogsworth. I know this is all down to Gaston and the prince. Stealing books, playing tricks. I have a mind to tell the king myself, said Monsieur Bibliau. And who do you think the king will believe? A bumbling old fool of a librarian who believes in ghosts? Or his son? Now, go back to bed before you lose your position, Monsieur Bibliau, said the prince with a mean-spirited expression. Yes, I suggest we all go back to bed, said Mr. Cogsworth, who seemed rather uncomfortable with the entire situation, fiddling with the belt of his dressing jacket. Monsieur Bibliau was defeated. There was nothing to be done. Not now, anyway. As he made his way out of the library with Mr. Cogsworth and the grumbling, groggy footman behind them, he distinctly heard Gaston's voice along with the prince's coming from the library. He quickly shot a glance over at Cogsworth to see what his reaction would be, but there was nothing. The major domo was stoic as ever. Not a flinch, not even a look, as if they hadn't both heard the same thing. You're not really going to have Monsieur Bibliau dismissed, are you, Kingsley? Gaston had asked, and the prince replied, I haven't decided yet. No, this wasn't the end for Monsieur Bibliau. He and Mr. Cogsworth both knew the prince and Gaston had been behind the missing books from the beginning. Perhaps together they would find a way to punish the boys for breaking Monsieur Bibliau's rules.